I want to tell you about the worst thing my son ever did to me. And then, if you'll stay with me, I want to tell you how I found out I had it wrong. All of it. For 6 years. My wife died on a Tuesday in March. Her name was Helen, and she was the best thing that ever happened to a plain, hard man like me. And she died in a hospital bed with our daughter holding one hand and me holding the other. And our son wasn't there. Danny wasn't there when his mother died. He'd barely been there the whole time she was sick. And I decided, standing in that hospital room, that I would never forgive him for it. I'm 71 years old. I spent 43 years as a machinist, and I'm going to tell you what that trade does to a man, because it explains everything I got wrong. A machinist deals in tolerances. A part is in spec or it's scrap. There's no story you can tell me about why the part failed that makes the part not failed. It works or it doesn't. A man shows up or he doesn't. And by that measure, the only measure I had, my son didn't show up when it counted most, and that made him scrap. That's how I thought. God help me. That's exactly how I thought. For 6 years, I barely spoke to him. 6 years. I have grandchildren I watched grow up in photographs, and I told myself the whole time that I was the wronged one, the strong one, the one who'd stood by Helen while our boy ran off. I wore it like it was something to be proud of. Then, this past spring, I found out what was actually happening in my son's life during the months his mother was dying. And I want to tell you, there is no worse feeling on this earth than discovering that the story you built your anger on, the story you sacrificed 6 years of your son's life for, was wrong. Not a lie he told me, a lie I told myself, because it was easier to be angry at him than to be sad about her. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you who I am, and let me be honest about it, because I've spent 6 years being the hero of this story, and it's time somebody told it straight. My name is Ray Kowalski, 71. I worked the same machine shop for 43 years, and I was good at it. And being good at it is most of what I know about being a man, which turns out to be the whole problem. Let me explain what I mean, because it matters. When you run a lathe or a mill for 4 decades, the work teaches you a certain way of seeing the world, and you don't even notice it happening. The work doesn't care about your reasons. Steel doesn't care that you had a hard night. A part is machined to tolerance, or it's rejected, and no explanation you offer changes the measurement. I spent my whole life in a world where results were the only truth, and excuses were just noise men made before they got fired. I was proud of that. I thought it made me honest. I thought a man who deals in hard facts and doesn't tolerate excuses is a strong man. What I never understood, until I was 71 years old, is that people aren't parts. People fail in ways that have reasons, and the reasons aren't noise. Sometimes the reasons are the whole story. But I'd spent 43 years training myself not to hear reasons, and by the time it mattered most, I couldn't hear them anymore. I'd machined that part of myself right off. My wife was Helen. We were married 44 years. Helen was everything I'm not. Where I saw a part, in or out of spec, Helen saw a person having a hard day. Where I heard an excuse, she heard someone asking for help in the only language they had left. She used to say to me, "Ray, not everything that's true can be measured." I'd nod like I understood. I didn't understand. I'm only starting to now, and she's not here to see it, and that's a particular kind of punishment I've earned. We had 2 children, Susan and Danny. Susan is the older one. Susan is like me, if I'm honest, which is maybe why we always got on so easily. practical, steady, shows up. When Helen got sick, Susan was there every single day, and I don't want a word of what's coming to take that away from her, because it was real, and it was hard, and she carried a lot. Susan stayed. That was the fact I built everything on. Susan stayed. And Danny, my son. Danny was always Helen's boy, the soft one, the one who felt everything twice as hard as anybody else, and never quite grew the armor the rest of us grew. Even as a kid, Danny was the one who cried at things, who took things to heart, who I was forever telling to toughen up. I thought I was doing him a favor. I thought the world would be easier on a harder boy. I spent his whole childhood trying to machine him into something more like me, and thank God I failed, though it took me 71 years to be grateful for it. When Helen got sick, Danny came around less and less, and then, near the end, he was barely coming at all. A phone call here and there. Excuses I didn't listen to, because I'd trained myself not to listen to excuses. And the day his mother died, he wasn't there. Susan and I were. He wasn't. At the funeral, he tried to talk to me. He came up to me by the casket, and he looked terrible, gray, like he hadn't slept in a month, and he started to say something, started to try to explain. And I looked at my son over the body of my wife, and I said the words I would give anything, anything to take back. I said, "Don't. Your mother waited for you. You couldn't be bothered. So don't you dare stand here now and make excuses to me." And I turned my back on him. At his own mother's funeral. I turned my back on my grieving son, and I walked away, and I felt righteous doing it. He called a few times that first year. I didn't pick up, or I picked up and was cold enough that he stopped. And a man can only reach for a father who keeps pulling away so many times before he stops reaching. Danny stopped reaching. And I told myself that proved I'd been right about him all along. That's the thing about the story you need to be true. Everything becomes evidence for it. Even the wound you caused becomes proof you were right to cause it. 6 years. 6 years I lived inside that story, and I'd be living in it still, except that this past spring something happened that made the whole thing come apart. And the man it destroyed wasn't Danny. It was me. Let me tell you how I found out. It was a granddaughter. Of course it was. The young ones are the only people left who'll tell you the truth, because nobody's taught them yet which truths they're supposed to keep. Her name is Chloe. She's Danny's youngest, 16 now, and I'd like to tell you I knew her well, but I didn't. That's part of what I have to live with. I knew her the way you know a child from a Christmas card. But this past spring, Susan's own daughter was getting married, a big family thing. And family things are hard to keep everybody out of, even the ones you've written off. So Danny came. First time I'd been in a room with my son in a couple of years, and he brought his kids. And I mostly stayed on my side of the hall, and he stayed on his, the way you do, 2 men being careful, and I told myself I didn't care. But at one point I found myself out on the steps, getting some air, and Chloe came out and sat down next to me. 16, all elbows and phone, and she didn't have the sense yet to be careful around me, thank God. And she was just making conversation, the way kids do, and she said something. She wasn't trying to teach me anything, she was just talking. She said, "Grandpa Ray, can I ask you something? Dad never talks about it, but Mom told me once. Is it true you and Dad stopped talking right after Grandma died? Because that's like the exact same time everything blew up with him and Mom, so I always wondered if it was all connected." I said, "What do you mean everything blew up?" And Chloe looked at me funny, like I'd asked what color the sky was. She said, "You know, When Mom and Dad split. When Dad lost the house and he was sleeping in his truck for a while and he got really, really bad. That whole time. I was little, but I remember Dad crying in the car. Mom said that was the worst year of anybody's life, and we don't talk about it. Sleeping in his truck. I want you to understand, I didn't know any of it, not one word of it. I didn't know Danny's marriage had ended. I didn't know he'd lost his house. I didn't know my son had spent the winter his mother was dying, sleeping in his truck and crying in parking lots where his kids could see. I had built 6 years of righteous anger on the belief that Danny stayed away because he couldn't be bothered, and it turned out my son had been drowning in the exact same water that was drowning me at the exact same time, and I never even knew he was in the river. I don't remember most of the rest of that wedding. I remember Chloe kept talking, filling in the picture without any idea what she was doing to me, the way you'd keep pouring water into a glass without noticing it was already overflowing. Danny had been laid off that autumn. Helen got her diagnosis about a month later. His wife, Karen, left him around Christmas, took the kids most of the time. He fought to keep the house and lost it in the spring, right about when Helen was going into hospice. He'd had, Chloe said, some kind of breakdown, couldn't get out of bed for stretches. Karen had told the kids later that she'd been scared for him that year, scared what he might do. Scared what he might do. And into the middle of all of that, his mother was dying, and his father, the strong one, the one who'd spent Danny's whole childhood telling him to toughen up, was standing at that hospital wanting to know why he couldn't be bothered to show up. I need to tell you about the funeral again, because I've been carrying a picture of it for 6 years, and that afternoon on the steps, the picture changed, and I can't change it back. For 6 years, the picture in my head was this: my selfish son, finally deigning to appear, coming up to me at the casket to make his excuses, and me, righteous and strong, refusing to hear them. That's the picture I was proud of. Here's the picture now. A man who has lost his job, his marriage, his home, and very nearly his mind. A man who has been sleeping in his truck. A man whose mother has just died. And that man scrapes himself together and puts on the one suit he has left and comes to the funeral. And he walks up to his father, the one person on earth who might still be able to help him, and he opens his mouth to say, I think, and I'll believe this till I die, to say some version of, Dad, I'm not okay. I'm so far from okay. I couldn't come because I was barely surviving, and I was ashamed to let you see me like this. And his father said, Don't you dare stand here and make excuses, and turned his back. I didn't refuse to hear my son's excuses. I refused to hear my son's cry for help. There's a difference, and it's the difference I'll answer for. Because here's the thing I understand now that I couldn't understand then. Danny didn't come to that casket to explain himself to me. Danny came to that casket because he needed his father. He'd lost everything else, and his mother was gone, and I was all that was left, and he reached for me one last time. And I looked at the most broken he had ever been in his life, and I called it an excuse, and I walked away, because I'd spent 43 years teaching myself that a man who's failing is just a part that's out of spec. I machined my own son right out of my life, and I was proud of the cut. I sat on those steps a long time after Chloe went back inside. Then I did the only thing I could think to do. I went and found Susan. Because Susan was there that year. Susan was the one who stayed. And a small, cold thought had started up in me, and I needed to know if it was true. I found my daughter by the bar, and I asked her, quiet, "Susan, did you know about Danny, the house, the marriage, the truck, that year? Did you know?" And my daughter, who is so much like me, looked at me for a long moment, and she didn't say yes, and she didn't say no. She said, "Dad, it was a really long time ago," which is its own kind of answer. I'll tell you about that answer and about what I did next in a minute. But I needed you to sit in this part with me first, because a lot of you have a Danny, somebody you wrote off, somebody whose absence you decided you knew the meaning of. And I'm the last man on earth who's got any right to lecture anybody. But I'd give the 6 years back if I could, and I can't. So the only thing I can do with them is tell you, you might not know the meaning of it. I was so sure, and I was so wrong, and I nearly ran out of time to find out. Let me tell you what I did. I didn't call him. You don't fix 6 years of turned backs with a phone call. And besides, I'm a coward in all the ordinary ways, and a phone gives a man too easy a way to hang up on you. If Danny was going to close a door in my face, and he had every right to, I'd decided he was going to have to do it to my face. I owed him at least that. I owed him the chance to turn his back on me the way I'd turned mine on him, if that's what he wanted. So one Saturday morning this past spring, I drove 2 hours to the town where my son lives now. I'd had to ask Chloe for the address, which tells you everything. A grandfather asking a 16-year-old where her father lives. He's got a small place now, rents. He's rebuilt some over the years without any help from me, which I also have to live with. He answered the door in his work clothes, and when he saw it was me standing there, his face did something I'll never forget. It wasn't anger. Anger I could have handled. I deserve anger. It was worse than anger. It was a flinch. My son, 48 years old, flinched at the sight of his own father on the doorstep, the way you brace for a thing that's hurt you before. I did that. I built that flinch, one cold phone call at a time. He didn't ask me in. We stood on that step and he said, "Careful." "What do you want, Dad?" The same voice I'd have used. He learned it from me. And I want to tell you, I'd rehearsed something in the truck for 2 hours, something with shape to it, something that explained. And standing there in front of that flinch, all of it went out of my head. And what came out instead was just the true thing, plain. I said, "Chloe told me about that year, the house, Karen, the truck, all of it. I didn't know, Danny. I swear to you before God, I didn't know any of it." He didn't soften. If anything, he got harder, and his jaw worked, and he said, "I tried to tell you at the funeral. I came to tell you, and you—" And he stopped because he couldn't say it, and I couldn't stand that he couldn't say it, so I said it for him. "I turned my back on you, I know. At your mother's casket, when you'd lost everything, when you came to me for help, I called it an excuse and I walked away. I made myself hold his eyes while I said it, because looking away would have been for me, and this wasn't allowed to be for me. There's no version of that I can make all right, son. I'm not here to make it all right. I'm too old to insult you by pretending 6 years can be talked away on a doorstep. I just needed you to hear from my own mouth that I know what I did now. I didn't refuse your excuse, Danny. I refused you. When you were drowning, your father looked at you and saw a man making excuses, and that is the single worst thing I have ever done. And I did it to the best of my children, and I did it proud." He was quiet a long time, A truck went by on the road behind me. And then my son, who is Helen's boy, who feels everything twice as hard as anybody else, said the thing that broke me clean in half. He didn't yell. He said, "I needed you, Dad. I know I was a mess. I know I wasn't there for Mom the way Susan was, and I have to carry that, and I do carry it every day. But I was drowning, and you were the only one left, and I came to you, and you—" His voice went. "I stopped calling because every time I called, you made me feel like the thing you thought I was. And I already hated myself enough that year. I couldn't add your voice to it. So I stopped." "I know," I said. "I know." "You don't get to just show up," he said, and there were tears in it now, the anger and the grief all run together. "You don't get to find out the truth and drive up here and feel better and have it be fixed. It's not fixed. I don't know if it gets fixed." "I know that too," I said. "I'm not asking for it to be fixed. I don't have any right to ask you for a single thing. I'm 71, Danny. I'm not here to get 6 years back. They're gone. I burned them. I'm here because I found out my son needed me once, and I wasn't there, and I couldn't stand to let it be true that I found that out and did nothing. That's all this is. I'm not asking you to open the door. I'm just, finally, standing on the right side of it. And here's where the crack opened. Not the door, not all the way, just a crack." He looked at me for a long moment, this wary, wrung-out good man I'd thrown away. And he didn't invite me in, but he didn't go in either. He came out. He sat down on the step, heavy, the way I sit down now, and after a second, I sat down next to him, careful, an old man's careful, and we sat on his front step, not looking at each other, the two hardest-headed men in the family, and we didn't fix anything. But we sat there, and after a while he said, not warm, but not cold either, just tired and true, "Chloe likes you. God knows why." Whew, and I let out a breath that might have been a laugh, and he almost did too. And that was it. That was the whole of what I got that day, and it was more than I'd earned. And I drove the 2 hours home and cried most of the way, and they were not all sad, those tears. That's the strange thing nobody tells you. Not all of them were sad. It's been a few months now. I'm not going to sell you a reunion because we didn't have one, and this channel has never been about the tidy lie. Danny and I are not what we were before, because what we were before is gone, and honestly, what we were before wasn't much. We're something newer and smaller and more careful than that. We talk on the phone now, short calls, awkward ones sometimes, but he picks up. He didn't have to ever pick up again, and he picks up. I've been out to see the grandchildren twice. Chloe's teaching me to text, which is a humbling business at 71. I met Danny for coffee last month, just the two of us, and it was stiff, and there were long silences, and it was one of the best mornings I've had in 6 years. Repair doesn't feel like the movies. It feels like two people being clumsy and brave in a diner. That's what it feels like. Don't let anybody tell you it looks better than that, or you'll wait for the movie version and miss the real one. Susan and I have had our talk too. That's between us mostly. I'll say only that I understand why she let me believe what I believed. It made her the good one, and being the good one was a warm place to stand, and I was so eager to hand her that warm place because it kept my anger tidy. I don't blame Susan the way you might want me to. Susan didn't build my anger. I built my anger. Susan just failed to talk me out of it, and I never once made it safe for her to try. We're all right, Susan and I. It's Danny I nearly lost forever. Here's the thing I know now, and it's the only thing I've got to give you, and it cost me 6 years to learn it. You are going to be certain about somebody. Someday you already are. You're going to look at what somebody did or didn't do, and you're going to be dead sure you know what it means. That they didn't call because they didn't care. That they stayed away because they're selfish. That their silence is contempt. And you're going to build a whole fortress of righteousness on top of that certainty, and it's going to feel strong. It's going to feel like strength, standing up there being right about them. I'm telling you from the top of a fortress I lived in for 6 years. You might be wrong. You might be so wrong. The person you've written off might be drowning in a river you can't see right next to you the whole time. And the strong thing, the actually strong thing, the thing my Helen knew that took me 71 years to understand, is not standing firm on your certainty. Any hard fool can do that. I did it for 43 years and called it character. The strong thing is being willing to go and knock on the door and say the words, "I might have had you wrong. Tell me. I'm listening now." I wasn't listening for most of my life. Helen used to say, not everything that's true can be measured, and I'd nod, and I never heard her, not really, not till it was nearly too late. I'm listening now, Helen. I want you to know that, wherever you are. I finally learned to hear the reasons. It just cost more than I ever wanted to pay. If you've got a Danny, don't do what I did. Don't wait 6 years and a wedding and a 16-year-old to tell you the truth by accident. Go knock on the door. You might be wrong. Pray that you are. Being wrong, it turns out, is a door. It's staying certain that's the wall. I'm Ray Kowalski. Thank you for sitting with me tonight. I don't feel much like a wise old man. I feel like one who got it wrong, learned it too late to do it right, and just barely in time to do it at all. But if there's a place here for a man like that, I'd be glad to sit with you again. Like and subscribe, and come back next time. The porch light's always on. For all of them. Even the ones who stopped reaching. Especially those.